Great. Okay. Yeah, I think that's that important to say is that like, you know, I'm not like by any means a teacher. I don't think there's any way to like learn how to write playwriting. So I thought what we do today is like go through some of the stuff that I've been thinking about recently that I found kind of useful in like shaping my own ideology about writing and theatre. And then I thought we could have like a little chat about some stuff like that, ask some questions, and then leave some time at the end just to chat about anything anyone else wants to go through. But before we get into it, I think it'd be really good just to go around and say what like brought you to this session, what you want to get out, what you think you might want to get out of it maybe, and how you're feeling. And we'll say how we're feeling in the form of a suite. I'm going to say, Billy, you can start.
Okay, a sweet. How am I feeling? I'm just going to say like a ginger nut biscuit. I feel like I've been feeling very warm and toasty today. And I've also eaten a lot of those, so that's not very imaginative, but they're just right there and it's very easy. And I am here, obviously, as a representative of Box Tricks, but also I think it's a really interesting subject. I think it's nice to have a conversation that's not, I know it's nice to have something a little bit more abstract to talk about rather than just like, this is how you do this specific thing. So I'm looking forward to that. Who shall I pass it on to?
World's your oyster.
I'll give it to Sarah.
Hey, Sarah, obviously. I'm like a biscuit that's been left out of the packet for too long. That's how I feel at the minute. Like a really soft, rich tea. That's really disappointing. that sums it up, I think. I've had a few little things put on, but I'm living in an absolute pit of rejection at the minute, and I'm literally, you know, when you're on the verge of just throwing everything in the bin, and I need to not do that, so I'm trying to find ways to not throw all my dreams in the bin, essentially, and keep holding on to it, because yeah, I'm a proper rejection pit at the minute. So yeah, that's why I'm here, basically.
I think we might have all been there before. And who are you passing on to?
Oh, Emma.
Oh, hello. Yeah, I'm a novelist and a playwright, and novel stuff is going really, really slowly right now. And usually what I do is when one thing is very slow, I try to energize myself by jumping into the other area. So yeah, I'm spending the next couple of months really like focusing on plays and giving some time to craft, which I think is pretty important. In terms of sweet, I'm not like a big sweet person, but I feel like I'm probably one of those lollipops that you get at the dentist. You know, you're not always happy to see them, but they're pretty good when they get going.
Right.
I will pass on to Sean.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sean. I'm a short story writer and a playwright. And yeah, I guess at the minute I've just kind of transitioned from working full time in copywriting to now kind of spending 2 days a week to focus on my creative practice. So I guess at the minute I'm also a bit of a rich tea because I'm ready to I'm trying to just absorb as much as I can in this time that I have at the minute. So
nice. I pass it on to.
Can I go next?
I think it's you, Sean.
It's me. Hello. What am I saying? Oh yeah. So I am like a playwright, and but I've also just been recently like learning a bit more about writing for TV as well. I just got in like to the end of my second play, but it got cancelled because of COVID. So it's that whole thing of like picking it back up again and trying to make it happen. So that's all going on. And then if I was a sweet, I mean, today, I think I'd be something that's like a little bit like sherbet came to mind, because I feel like today I've been a bit on the edge because I'm also a dog sitter, and I've been dog sitting a dog. I'm currently dog sitting one that's like super like anxiety driven. So I just feel constantly on edge, like, what is he gonna bark now? What's gonna happen? Is he like, so yeah, I'm just a bit currently a bit on edge, but I've taken myself to a separate room, so I'm giving the dog a bit of space for a few hours.
Great. Awesome. I feel like a sort of like half-sucked fruit pastel. Feel a bit drained, but also still a little bit of sugar in me. So there we are. Great. So I think like one thing beautiful to talk about today then, I've listened to that, is like how we return to like ourselves, and like how we return to this idea of what we like about our work and ourselves. I think that feels like a useful starting place. So I guess as an opening question then, where do ideas come from? And there's no right or wrong answer. I think we just like leave our mics on and just talk. There's only five of us. So let's just like we're in a coffee house.
Yeah, I was gonna say like from chatting with my mates, a lot of the time like creative ideas come from like conversations that I have with people.
Yeah, cool. Fine. Where else?
Yeah, I was going to say I draw a lot from personal experience and then try and adapt that into something else. But yeah, so from like memories or from
chatting, personal experience.
Yeah.
Where else?
I write a lot of historical fiction, so and like plays that are based on parts of history. So a lot from like radio and museums and oral history and that sort of thing for me.
Great. Anyone else?
People. I live in a village, so I don't see a lot of people, but we're in Edinburgh at the weekend, and I had a brilliant time on the top of the double-decker bus just watching everyone and all the crack when we were going around Leeds. I took a million photos and wrote loads of stuff. There was a guy in the full kilt, like putting the shits up, tourists, just standing there looking like some kind of really nice person. And then when tourists came by, we'd jump out on them. And I could have watched him all day. He was brilliant. He's like in my notebook. So just watching crack,
people, the world,
basically.
the past. All these things are true. I think all this stuff's true. Like, so how do we know when like what's a good idea? How do you know a good idea?
I think like something that won't leave you alone, like where you kind of like go to bed thinking about it, wake up thinking about it if you can sleep because you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I've had two versions of that. I've had the version where they're excited and the version of like, why the fuck isn't this working? What else?
I think when you tell the idea to somebody, their eyes light up and they go, ooh. And then you're like, oh, yeah, it's not just me. Somebody else is interested in this.
Okay, so other person's physical reactions, not being able to let go, being inside. What else?
Is it about, because I like as a writer, I feel quite often I plague myself with the idea of like, this has to be good, but actually like as long as it's true to you, like that's what's good, like as long as you're trying to say something that is true to what you believe, or like rather than like what you think is good, or like what trying to like do what other people might think is good, if that makes sense.
100%, and you've just ruined the whole exercise. But there we are. Exactly, right?
Sorry.
I think there's a big difference between like, I think this is a good idea and this feels like a good idea. What you all said, which I think is true, is like, it's about physical reactions to things. Other people's eyes lighting up, like feeling can't get out of our bodies. Feelings just won't go away. Like, I think we feel truth and we think good, and they're two different things. Like, because in all honesty, like, you know, when people tell me that, like, I don't know, for example, Rob Ike's a genius, I'm like, okay, I don't enjoy it. So like, where does it sit with me? So what is good? And like, it's right at the very start of a project, we're talking about what we're doing. Good has to be about feeling true. Has to be about a physical reaction. It's gonna be a physical thing. So like, so when do we? Can anyone think of a time when they felt that thing? They're just like, I have to talk about this thing. And what's that like? What's that moment like?
I definitely have one. So one of the first big plays that I wrote, or big-ish for me, is about purity culture, which is about a culture that I grew up in, and had really negative impacts on me as a young person, and as an adolescent, and is about like rape culture and all that sort of thing. And the need to like tell that story was just so visceral. It couldn't be stop. And yeah, it was just that real feeling of like, if I don't tell this story, not only am I going to suffer, but other people might suffer. And it became sort of like in a weird way inside my head, like an act of public service, not necessarily just about art, but yeah.
I think public service is a really good word to use for like art, right? Especially when we're getting paid by the Arts Council, which is literally public money. Like, yeah, I think we'll come back to that a bit, the idea of public service. But just to step back, so like this thing you're feeling in your body, you feel that thing. And then sometimes we don't even know what that thing is. We just feel like there's something in our lives we can't quite articulate. And then the next thing's like saying, all right, what is this? What is it? And you're like, then it becomes blind. Sometimes it becomes blindsidingly obvious, where you're like, obviously, I'm feeling a lot about, for example, the death of my father. And you're like, well, if I can talk about that, then maybe that's useful. It's true. It's in my body. And you cannot tell me, you can never tell me it's not good because it's true to me. And it's about tapping in, I think, a way into like this, just at the start, it's like a really broad theme. I think for the start of the process, it's just like realizing you feel it, you feel something in your body and putting that thought into a theme. What do you think? Just an idea. It's like really at the very, very top of it. It's like, I actually need to talk about this. What do you all think? And
Yeah,
like,
I think that,
sorry.
No, sorry.
Sorry.
No, I didn't know. I got a DYCP grant to write play, and started writing about being child free, which is something I've wanted to write about for ages. And then I keep like chickening out a little bit because it's something that people don't talk about, and like, well, people don't talk about it. But the more I talk about it, the more people do talk about it, and then something will come up on the internet, and I'm like, I'm so angry about this. Like, it's such a fit for me. It's such a physical feeling, and it's so tied up with, you know, like menopause and being a woman and ownership and all of these things. Like, I feel like I can't not, and every time I try to put it away because I'm worried about it and not being good or the right idea, I'm like, I have to talk about it because I feel I like physically like explode with almost like it's like it's trying to push its way out of my body, you know.
Completely. And it's so interesting what you just said there about that idea of like feeling something really viscerally, but then being afraid to talk about it. It's not the sweet spot of like, you know, it's not the moment we definitely know we should be speaking, but we're like, this is true, and society doesn't talk about this. No? What do you think?
It's kind of like you go.
Oh, I think there's a balance of like desperation and terror. And when you're kind of like, if you go too far one way or the other, you won't do it. And you have to be in that kind of spot where you are both desperate to say it and terrified of saying it so that you do it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I do think there's like definitely fear involved.
Yeah, I think when something becomes like I know how important writing personally is, like and you know, writing that comes from within yourself. But I think for me, when writing becomes personal and when I really feel like I'm tapping into it, that's when it becomes the most terrifying for me.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, that's
about the sweet spot, isn't it? It's so hard though. It is really hard because sometimes you feel like a sense of yourself because you think that so and so might think so and so. But I think actually we've just got to go, fuck it. Our job's to present truth, right, and start actively starting conversation. But it is scary. But truth and fear is a great place to start. I think it's much better than, oh, this sounds clever.
Yeah.
Like that's the opposite. And like I've been that sometimes in my life. I've been like, that's a really clever idea. I've been like, of course hamsters can skate. That's really cool to watch. Or whatever, that's a shit example, but you know what I mean. And like starting from cleverness is fine, but it doesn't do anything. It's pointless. It's just a clever idea. I don't ever engage with art to be impressed by the cleverness of an artist. Engage with art to feel like they're talking to me, in my experience. So we've got the feeling then. We move into the theme. We don't know what the theme is. And then the next thing, I suppose, is like nailing down like tent poles so that we can never be told that it's shit. And I think this is the trick. I think this is like the cornerstone of seeing projects through. Because I think like one thing we must remember is like in every project, will always be a part where we go, this is shit, I hate this, I hate myself, what's the fucking point? And the way we combat that is reminding ourselves that we're working from truth and that the whole thing is active. But we'll come on to that in a second. So the next thing then is to like think about, okay, I know this theme. Why would I talk about this thing? And like the minute we start to like build these building blocks, it's like, okay, I want to talk about death, and actually because like this is really personal to me. And then no one can say that you can't talk about this thing because you know exactly why it is you need to express that thing. So putting the theme, this like felt truth in the context of us, gives us a grounding, the acceptance that we have the right to tell this story. And that's a really fucking hard thing to do, because like, especially in this day and age where, you know, we always ask ourselves, and obviously, you know, we have to think a bit further about like, why me, why I tell this, why my perspective. We'll come to that in a second. But like, firstly, it's like, what has drawn me to this thing? How do I put this in the context of me? And then the next thing being like, okay, once I know that, what do you think about that so far as a starting place?
It's really interesting. I think because it's like what you were saying about fear and it being like I think it's like the kind of fear of the unknown thing in a way. It's like I find writing as a way of like organizing or working out what I think about something. So it'll be like, oh, I'm really obsessed with this thing, but I need to get that down in some way that I can then understand it. Like it's sort of like a tool, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And like, honestly, sorry, Sean.
I was just gonna say, I think it's also interesting to kind of legitimize it to yourself. I think too often, and I guess a lot of other people think about legitimizing it to other people.
Yeah.
I think it totally makes sense to legitimize it to yourself first as like a priority.
100%, because it's so easy. Because I know this. It's so easy to talk about something. It's so easy to say this is shit. What's the point? It's so easy. But we need to remind ourselves that, like, well, hopefully we'll talk about tomorrow, but like remind ourselves why we're doing this and why it's worth it and why it's important. So if we can do that, then no one can tell you you're wrong. And that's the important thing. Even when you get rejected, which will always happen, then, you know, it doesn't matter, because, you know, you realize why you're doing it. Okay. So next question is then, once I know it's working from truth, I know what the theme is, I know sort of like why it's in the context of me. The next question is like, what is it about this moment then in our society that makes this worth talking about? Because like ultimately, which some of this before we come on with Billy, is like, we have to find a moment to like have a conversation about something that's really big, like this theme we're talking about, that's true to us, that is weirdly both eternal and archaic, and also incredibly present. And that sounds really, really complex, but I don't think it is. I think it's a difference between saying like, John got murdered yesterday on my road, and then saying, yes, John got murdered, but why do people kill people? As a question. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Am I talking nonsense? Please tell me.
It's like, it reminds me a bit of yesterday I was in another talk, like it was through the BBC, Ralph and Katie talk, Q&A thing. And then they were talking about like being specific and like finding what you want to say and like be specific about it, make it like true to you, will then in a way like reach other people, because you're not gonna trying to reach everyone, you reach no one. So like I felt like that was really useful, because it's like, if just trust that like you know, be true to what you want to say, and then inevitably that will reach someone else, because like if it's like with the universal themes. And so yeah,
it's like finding that balance between knowing what the universal thing is and also knowing why this conversation happens now. And like it's such a mental balance, because it's difficult. You don't want to be like, well, in this moment of time, this is the moment. It's like, what is it about the culture of now that needs this conversation? It's not necessarily about like justifying it with like news quotes and stats. It's also about saying, what is the world we live in now that's not going away? You know, like with the childless thing, it's like that is not going to be not a thing for a very long time. You know, as long as there are people giving birth to babies, that conversation will always be happening. It's always be eternal. And this moment amplified in this age of whatever, you know. So yeah, I think like about finding like why we need to talk about this in this specific moment, you know, this eternal thing through this specific vortex of now. Yeah, thoughts?
I think that's like very, yeah, I found that to be very true in my own work. The difference between just telling a story that's about me and telling a story that is about me, but also about everyone.
Yeah.
Because if the story isn't about everyone, then they're just going to hear my story and be like, oh, that happened to you. That's sad, or that's bad, or that's terrible. But if people don't feel like they have some kind of ownership on the story, then there's no kind of, they're not walking out of the theatre with anything inside of them. They're not carrying it with them.
How do you think we do that? How do you think we move towards a story that everyone can see themselves in? How do we do that?
That everyone sees themselves in.
Or most people, or like, yeah, well, everyone can recognize themselves in, yeah.
I don't even know if that's possible, is it?
I think so. Something that something that we did on like the dramaturgy for one of my plays was like we talked about like the narrative impact, like on in terms of the story, like what happens to the character, like what happens to the community, and then what does it mean kind of globally. And I'd never like thought about global questions before. But then when I started to think about it, I realized that so many of like my favorite plays have global commentary as well as being like personal. Like if you look at Lungs, like if people know Lungs, I've totally forgotten who it's written by. I'm so sorry. I'm so thank you. You know, it's about this couple who are, and it's really about them, but it's also about the community they create in their relationship. But it's got these huge global themes about like climate change and relationships that are, and that's what people kind of take with them, if you know what I mean. So I do think it's possible, but it is complicated because obviously when you first write something, if you write for a global question, then your play is not going to have real characters. I don't know if that makes sense. If you start too big, then you lose like the small intimacies that make the big stuff matter.
Yeah, I feel like if we start from this place of like what I want to talk about is true, this feels real to me, then it's always going to start personally. Then we think about like why we talk about this thing in the context of now. That's when we get the political stuff or like the social stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Because then like I think the thing about like being archaic is like if we're speaking truth, then it's always going to come from a human, so it will be humanly relatable. What do you think? Is that nonsense?
It feels like it's going back to that like difference between the thing that's felt and like the clever idea. Like it feels like the kind of thing that is like I said, like an emotion that feels true to you. Like you might not have experienced XYZ, but you might understand what it feels like to be lost or something like that. And obviously there are very specific experiences that not everyone can relate to, but also I think, like you say, like if it's coming from that place that feels very genuine versus like, here is a clever idea I've had that I'm going to tell you what I think about this, and you're just going to go and deal with it. Like it's kind of like you're not asking someone to connect with you.
Yeah.
I would also find, like in terms of my own writing, like I'd find it. I have done this, and I'm like talking through experience. I'm like when I'm trying to write for everyone, I literally can't write. That's when I start to hit walls, and I'm like, I get like self-doubt. But if I'm like trying to just think of it in character form, like Emma was saying, you know, if you try and put those emotions and the feelings into characters and like try and just depict them and bring them to life, or through a story or through a scene or whatever, that's become like just in terms of the process. Because as soon as I start thinking outwards and thinking about the world, or even thinking about the audience that come to see it, like my writing brain's like, no, fuck no, I can't write anything else. So
yeah, exactly. But I think it's like, I think if you're working from a place of truth, like and a world you know like why you're talking about it. If you know it's real and you know why you're talking about it, and you know the thing you're talking about, and you can understand like why this moment is the conversation for it, then I feel like you're doing all that stuff. So I feel like it starts from humans, and then you put them in a social context. So you're doing that thing about like being platforming truth, and we'll talk about this in a second. And then like you're doing the social stuff. It's kind of all there. That's kind of the personal and the political and the eternal, just because it's starting from humans. I think that, so on that note, then it's like thinking about, if we know, like if we know that we're talking face of truth, if we know why we want to talk about this thing, if we know why we want to talk about this thing now, I guess like the next question is then like, oh, actually no, before that, probably like, why would we do this in this specific place? Because theater is such a mad thing, because like, okay, here's a question: does theatre happen in a place or a space?
A space, I guess. I don't think you need to be like restricted about where it is. I think yeah, for me it's like it could happen anywhere, I guess.
What does anyone else think?
Yeah, when I think of place, I think of like more, this is literally just me, like in my head, but like when I think of place, I think of like a specific area that I have to go to, an address that I need to find. But when I think of space, I think like that could be cultivated anywhere you go, like, or anywhere you can be in a space anywhere. Maybe, I don't even know really.
It's so interesting. I think the both answer kind of right. It's like theatre unquestionably happens in a place because like it's literally happening in front of you. You're watching a thing, and that building you're in that town you're in, has connotations, that has its own shit going on. But also you don't necessarily know that when you're writing it. So like it's a really difficult thing to like try and get your head around. But like if we assume that it's going to happen in a theatre, and you know what this theatre is, you also have to ask like, why would we tell this story here? You know, like what is it about this place that what about this place needs us to have this theme? So like if you know that like I'm talking from truth, okay, let's just like proper context. So let's just say I want to talk about loneliness in men, and I want to talk about it because like I feel like I've experienced that, and actually I'm talking about it here because in Liverpool I noticed loads of men that talk about how they feel, and I think now in this age of loads of men kill themselves and over-reliance on antidepressants, so we've got like a really strong foundation of like why this thing exists. Do you see what I mean? And I think this is so important we lay down our starting place for our projects, because ultimately that's what's going to see us through the whole thing, knowing why. And the last question, which I think is the most important question, is like, what is it about this time and this place and that would change if I had this comment, if I talked about this thing? Because you have to remember that, like I said before, it's like the act of storytelling isn't about our egos, it's about other people hearing them. So why would I share this story? I want to talk about men being lonely because I've experienced that, and men in Liverpool don't talk about it, and loads of men here specifically at this moment of time kill themselves and you know, take lots of antidepressants. Actually, if we spoke about it, maybe we all might feel less alone and less weird and not do that. And it sounds really like prescriptive, but I think if we can lay down these flagpoles at the start of the process, we realize actually our ideas are inherently good because they're true and they're selfless and they're urgent and they're relevant to this time and moment and ourselves and our lives. And if we know that, then no one can tell us that it's pointless and shit, because it's inherently not. What do you think? Thoughts, feelings?
I think I definitely like feel the relevancy of that because I write in prose as well. And so when you're writing a novel, you obviously are not writing for any one location, right? You're not writing for one audience or one set of people. But yeah, when you're writing a play, the audience is a part of your writing process. You know, you anticipate that they will be there, and depending on the type of theatre that you write, they might be involved in different ways and that sort of thing. So it is like having an extra limb attached to the body of your writing, this audience creature. And yeah, it also feels pretty truthful for where the Arts Council is right now in terms of like their push towards like community and space and places. You know, they're definitely sort of favoring those types of those bids. So like writing thinking about plays in those ways is only going to sort of like, I know that sounds quite mercenary, but
no, it's completely true. It's completely true. Yeah, and also I think useful, because like I think what you want to start doing, I think what you want to call it, what I want to personally call in theatre is people being clever at me. I just can't be asked. I have no interest in it. I can barely afford to go as it is. I don't want to go and have some posh boy for me and tell me he's clever. Don't care. I don't care. Sorry if anyone went to eating. Great. So I think that's the first part of it then, is like the intention. Because ultimately art is like two things. It's like what I want to talk about, and we've got to validate all that stuff and like give ourselves like the groundwork to go and do that. The second thing is like how we talk, how we have that conversation. And again, it's the same battle, and if not more so, in asking ourselves, what do I actually like? What's actually the most like appropriate way to tell this story or explore this thing in a way that I actually like? Because we get told all the time what good art is by a certain group of people in the media, the press, or a certain type of person, live in a certain city, and they have a certain background and yada yada, and they're telling us what good is all the time. So it's our responsibility then to go, actually, if I'm making work that's going to be representative of me, it's going to be like my art, I have to ask myself, what do I actually like? So what do we actually like?
I had a big
my
thing with
money's
this.
worth. Sorry, you go, Billy.
I was going to say I had a big kind of wrestle with this with like genre. Like I think I've sort of had a bit of like a kind of turning point where I realized that all the stuff that I like grew up watching that I really loved was all kind of like genre stuff, was like kind of sci-fi and fantasy, and it almost feels like you're told that's not proper like drama if it's got like, you know, I don't know, aliens or werewolves in it or whatever. And I think there was a moment where I was like, oh no, I can write stuff that like is kind of not of this world or is in some way heightened, and letting myself do that meant that the work was just better because I actually cared about it, and I was finding a way of using those things to talk about stuff that was relevant and important to me, if that makes sense. So yeah, it was kind of then suddenly like everything was like magical realist, but in a way that felt very rooted in stuff that was like immediate and present, but just because I gave myself permission to be like, actually I like that kind of stuff, like I'm not going to be embarrassed about it anymore, I'm a geek about it, it's fine.
Yeah, it's so important to be able to do that. It's so important, you know. And like they always, like when I started writing, they were like, yeah, you do anything you like, but also we only produce plays that are like this. What's everyone else like? What's everyone experience of this? Do you feel like you've censored yourself? Do you think what you like isn't cool?
Definitely. I think I love comedy and I love chaos. And I think I've tried to be way too serious for a couple of years, and now that I've decided not to be serious, the stories that are starting to form, I'm like, if I told that in a funny way, why can't I tell, you know, why am I trying to be all, I don't know, I think I was doing the whole, oh, it needs to have some kind of message or some deeper meaning, but now I'm trying to come from like the characters first and seeing where they go. It just feels like there's like a humour coming through. Yeah. And I feel like I don't want to be ashamed of it. And I love that the thing about genre, Billy, is so true, because I do loads of teaching and facilitating as well. So my writing gets like put on the shelf a little bit, but it's so often people are really scared about genre and about snobbery around genre, and that happens in all literary everywhere, theatre and short stories and novels. Everyone's just like, oh, it needs to be literary, but it's got to be what people enjoy. Like,
Exactly.
if people are reading it and consuming it, like
100%. If you take this idea that like if we're really aware of like what the conversation is, what might change if we have this conversation, then surely by deference we want most people to have that conversation. So we've got to, this is just me. Well, people don't agree with me on this, but I'm gonna just say this is what I think. It's like I think that we want the most people to have the conversation, so we've got to try and be a bit more popular if you want to make the most impact. That's my opinion. What do you all think? You can tell me wrong. I've got friends of mine who shout at me for that all the time. So they're like, you can't just try and sell out. You've got to try and express what you want to express in your, you know, whatever. You're silencing the real artists, etc. I'm like, well, I've got a mortgage. What else? What's everyone else think?
I guess. Sorry.
Go on. No, go on, Sean.
Do you think that's changed from working in commercial theatre, or have you kind of always felt that way? Just intrigued.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh no, I've always felt that way. I've never even worked in commercial theatre, really. I just I've never made really small pieces. I've always made like slightly less small. I've never also made very big pieces, really. I've never made like really, you know, I don't know. No, I think it's always been my idea. It's like I'm really into John McGrath. You ever come across him? Oh my God, John McGrath's my hero. So John McGrath.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't hear you properly.
Oh, John McGrath. He wrote a book called A Good Night Out, and I'll tell you, his whole story is amazing. He's a Scouse fella. Well, he's from Wirral, really. He's from Wirral, and he went to Oxbridge. Then he became the literary manager at the Royal Court. He had a breakdown in the 30s, and he was like, "There's no point in doing any of this because this whole organization exists just because everyone in the audience wants to be on the stage. There's no real people in the situation. It's just feeding artists." So he came to Liverpool. He ran the Everyman in Liverpool. And he sort of did these like parochial plays, but never really sort of like settled. These like local satires they were. And then he went to Scotland and started a company called 784. And his idea was, how do we have the biggest conversation in the most accessible way we can? So it wasn't necessarily big. It was also like, we might have a big party and also talk about the fact that the English are stealing all our oil, you know, or whatever. That's the question. So I love him. That's where I got it from. But we got to find a way to like think about how we can tell our stories in a way that is most us, and like in a way that is also like the most appropriate way that we can talk about it. It's such a mad thing to think about this, but like I always think that like we need to find a form for stuff that feels like it is in some way linked to the theme we're talking about and is also us. Do you know what I mean? And that's really difficult. It's really difficult. I always try and like think about it as like well, if I think about like the style and the form as like from cultural life, and then like the structure of it, or like as like from theatre, what I might call it some interesting. So like it might be like it's a big mad gig with the fragmented psychosis of Sarah Kane or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So how do we marry those two things that's our taste and is relevant? If it's about like lonely men, what would appropriate form be for the Lonely Men project? What do we think? Let's work it out.
I always like the oxymoron of this. So like if it's something that's quite dark or like quite sad, I always like think of it in the complete opposite and then in terms of form, like because I'm a bit bonkers in that sense of like I love magical realism and stuff. So it's like I love to use that in a way that highlights like humanity and like the messiness of us and like what's going on in our head or whatever, and do that in like really bizarre sort of surreal ways, because that's what's real to me, like is, you know, when you feel certain themes or emotions, like the best way to get them across is like in a really abstract way, if that makes sense. Like yeah, so I'd say like, I don't know, so as a musical.
Yeah, exactly. I think musical's a great shout, like a big musical about, so like, because that's like a populist form where loads of people engage with it, and it'll be a really joyous exploration of why we all feel sad and don't talk towards each other. That feels really good. I'd fucking watch the shit out of that. I would watch the shit out of that. What else could we do?
Whatever it is, if it's about a lonely man, it needs to have as many men as possible in it. So then by literal presentation of it, how can the man be lonely if there are so many flipping men involved? Just Brilliant. Because it seems like that would be necessary.
Brilliant.
Yeah, some audience participation, some breaking the air.
Brilliant. What else? And then the second question we've got to ask is like, would I actually watch this? Big musical with a chorus of 1,000 men saying "We are sad." Be a hard sell, but I would watch it.
I'd watch it.
To an audience of us, I think we would definitely watch it.
I mean, it's not like it's unprecedented. I mean, if you look at like Band of Brothers and all of the, you know, these are anything about the war is a cast of 1,000 men, all very sad at a very specific time. So it's not like all you're doing is taking out the war. So what happens if you take out a war out of a war movie? Why are they all so sad? You know, that sort of thing, I guess.
Great. Yeah, I think that's fair. So I'm feeling this thing. I know what this theme is. I know why I want to talk about it. I know why now. I know why here. I know what would happen as a result of this. And I kind of found like a way, I think I want to talk about this thing that feels right to the theme and is me. And then, so the next question is like, how do we know what is me? How do we know what is my taste? How do we know that?
What do you mean, Luke? So like in terms of how do I know what I like?
Yeah, like how do we really know that? How do we know that? Do you know what I mean? It's like, have we made a big list of all the things we like? Do we go through our bookshelves and go like, oh, I like this about this, the comment? How do we know?
I would say by my bookshelf, like by the common denominators on my bookshelf, because I buy so many flipping books. Like, so it's just economy. It's economics really. Where's all my money gone? Mainly.
You let the free market decide your taste.
Mine's just like consumption. I don't necessarily know what I like until I find something new, and I feel like I find something new every day. Like I just watched that. Oh my god, what on earth is it called?
Am I being unreasonable?
And we stayed up all night because that's like me. Like we were like, I was like, I'm dying.
What's that?
For me, am I being unreasonable? The Daisy.
Oh, I love her. She's brilliant.
And I just. So now I'm like, well, I'll consume everything she's touched, you know, like because it's just so. And it was like that with Alma's Not Normal. I was like, I'm dead. This is so good. It just like I'm like, this is just inside my head, and the people are, you know. And then you explore the other people who are in it. So Jade, who is in Strictly now, who was in Alma's Not Normal, and I'd never watched stand up. My husband's like, oh, I've watched that stand up. I was like, oh my god, I didn't know. And then all the threads that go off it. So I just consume everything as much as I can, even stuff. And this is what I say when I teach as well. It's like even stuff you think might be shit. Like you should consume everything, because then at least you know what you don't like. And if you want to put something uncomfortable in something, if you've never consumed, I don't know, romance, and you don't like romance, how do you know how to mock it? I don't know. You know, you've got to let everything in, and then I think I'm constantly surprised by what I like as well. Like what we just finished yesterday, The Bear, which is like a series on thingy. It was insane, but the characters are like, it was mad. Everyone just talks at the same time, but it was amazing. And I've never been so stressed, but it was incredible.
That's the one about the chef, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about the chef. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think like you think that's something really important there, which I think is the heart of all this. It's like, how do we actively engage with art? And like, someone's the boss thing to me. It's like when you watch something, obviously you have your response to it, whatever that is, but it's useful at the end to ask, like, what is one thing I would steal from that? And what's one thing I'd do better? And eventually you end up a critical dialogue with it about like saying, how is this in relation to what I actually want to make? You know, if you look at like, when I read like K Tempest, I'm like, fucking hell. I love everything about the fact that these characters feel like gods and the language is amazing. What would I do better? Funnier. So then you might be like, the next time I talk about class in that way might be this epic poetry thing, but also comedy. I don't know. I think it's really useful to start thinking about art like that, because eventually you'll start to like, well, I've definitely found myself starting to like develop my own taste. I develop my own, not taste, my own ambitions for the stuff I want to make. Because it could be like, you know, with Alma's Not Normal and I'm being reasonable, I haven't seen being reasonable. Like, what's the comment that I made there is like both these women doing cool shit. I actually haven't seen either of those shows.
They're actually just like kind of almost, especially at my being unreasonable, everyone's just deeply unpleasant, and the people are generally kind of like that, and I love that part of it. But I think it's about letting you never. I don't know if it taste. I don't say I've got like a taste. I like new things a lot. I've never been fixed in anything, and I know some people are really fixed and they know what they like, but I think to make art, you need to be constantly open to all of it, like just in a big like wave over you all the time, if you possibly can.
I think so.
I just like deeply unpleasant people.
I also think one thing I did ages ago is I do actually think it's worth. I did this. I don't use a view. I did this. I think useful. I made a list of like every time I loved a film, for example, I wrote on a list and I was like, what is the thing I love about this film? And you start to realize these common patterns in what you love about stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I love really playful form. I love characters that are like trying to combat feeling awful, which want to be fun. And I love like these big issues that are told in these really playful ways. And I love all this stuff. And I realized like what I actually like, and what I actually want to make. I think like keeping a list of like, I've got my I'll try and show you. On my shelf there's like these are all the plays I fucking love, like 10 out of 10 stuff. And I was like, what is it about all these things? And you realize there are actually common denominators. And I think that like, I know it sounds really primitive, but like literally giving yourself that space to go, what do I actually like is I never did it, to actually sat down and did it, because you think it exists in you, but like having that space to sit down and go, actually it's this. And eventually what you get is like this really clear mission statement, which is like, I want to talk about this thing because it feels real to me for this reason, this time, in this place for this reason, and talk about this thing will happen. And the way that I think we could tackle this in terms of form is this, because that's appropriate. And because it's me, it's going to be like this. And suddenly you've got this entire fabric and foundation of a project written down as like a mission statement. You're like, that's what we're doing. That's what we're achieving. And what is super useful about this is that like once you've done that, obviously the next thing to do is like talk about character and story and all that stuff. But once you've got all that stuff written down on 2 pieces of paper, you're like, that's what we're making. Every dramaturgical conversation now is about achieving that, achieving the mission statement. Because like, as I'm sure you're aware, when you work with like bad directors or bad dramaturgs or bad script editors, you'll get people say things like, well, about on page 7, there could be a dragon. You're like, why? They're like, dragons are really cool right now. Yeah, but look what we're doing. It's not necessary in this moment to put a dragon in, so it validates your impetus, validates your choices, it validates the impact of the thing. It also makes the dramatical process much simpler because you've done most of the work already. No one can tell you your shit, and you can have joy in writing it because you know it works. That's why I think this is so useful, just to think about like these big benchmark tent poles, obviously with character and story and form stuff answered as well, and then you know what you're doing. That's like my idea of building good from like an organic place, rather than a place of like, Rob Ike does this, so I must try and do that, or like Simon Stevens does this, so I must try and do that. I think like trying to mimic people isn't useful. I think we have to be a bit more magpie-ish about like what we want and what we want to talk about and what we like about the world, and build from that place. Any thoughts, feelings, questions, opinions, violent takes?
I think it feels like just a really practical way. It feels like that thing that they always try and ask you, like if you're like applying for an opportunity or something, and it'll be like, why you? Why theatre? And often it feels like you're kind of trying to come up with something to like satisfy that, whereas this feels like it's putting the agency back and like in your hands and relating those questions to the project directly, rather than like trying to like kind of like mold it to fit a specific opportunity. Like I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but just I like the way that it ties together like the intention and the actual thing that you're making, which is lovely. Yeah.
It's so, honestly, I don't know you guys have felt this, but I when I was younger, I used to get like proper paralysis. What's the word?
Paralysis,
about making choices. So I was like, that's not good enough. And you're like, actually, it's not about being good. It's about being appropriate to what the truth you're working from is, and being appropriate to yourself. And like, that's actually better than any clever idea you'll ever have. It's my opinion. What do you think?
I agree. Yeah,
I think I struggle. I think I have that. I like paralysis sometimes as well. And I think it's a really, like, I think if you were starting like a production company or a theatre company, you would kind of maybe go through this process of having like this mission statement. But I think to apply that to like every piece of work you do, that makes a lot of sense, and kind of, makes you feel kind of each individual project is its own thing that you want to protect and that you believe in. So yeah, I think it's makes a lot of sense to me.
Great. Yeah, I think so. I just find it so much easier because, like, you know, if you write, like, if you do 2 pages of this, answer all these questions with the story on it, you've kind of done most of the work already. And then, like, it's so much easier to see what the thing is when it's in that form, and then, like, pick and turn it around than it is to write a whole play and then pick that apart, which I've also done and failed. When you're like, I've written this play, and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, what's it about? And you're like,
good question.
Life. And like, so it sounds really petty, but I think it also hits on the head with the Arts Council stuff. Like, if you're going to apply for the Arts Council, well, you kind of have to know the answer to these questions anyway. So I found that really useful. Yeah. What else are we going to talk about? So, like, we've got about 10 minutes before we're going to start talking about general stuff. So anything else wants to talk about this, specifically this document?
I was going to ask though, at which point, like, do you literally sit down with this document, like answer these bullet points, and then like only once you've got all of that material, you will start writing later on? Like, at what point do you start drafting? Oh,
ages away. I'll do this, and then I'll be like, all right, who can I do this with? Then I'll go around people who I think might also want to do something I thematically like this, or be like formulate this, or maybe a good match for a company or whatever. And then I'll spend ages bashing that back and forth with them until it's like in a thing, and hopefully they'll pay me, and then I'll start writing.
How do you find those kind of, sorry, I was gonna say, like, when you're like seeking out those partnerships, like how do you broach those conversations? Because I think sometimes it can be a little bit like, even like you said, like, this is brilliant at like reassuring yourself and building your armor of like, no, this is, I really believe in this, but like, how do you kind of convey that to someone kind of cold, if that makes sense?
I think of this as like, yeah, it's for me, but it's also a pitch document.
Yeah.
You know, I think like, honestly, if I say to you, if I'm like, look, I really want to make a play about my loneliness, because I feel like I'm so, as a man, I can't connect with people, and it sort of isolates me, even though I've got a partner and I've got children. I don't feel like I connect with people because like the expectation on me as a man means not to do that. And I think loads of my friends are like this. Like, actually, I think loads of my friends are secretly miserable. And in Liverpool especially, you know, I've noticed people in my class from school start to kill themselves, and like loads of my mates get drunk and tell me they take antidepressants. I want to make something that I think would make everyone have this conversation to realize they're not alone. And I just think the way to do this might be this big fuck off musical with like 1,000 men saying the same thing. And it could be like one of those genuine moments of social change in Liverpool. You know, if you write like that, just answering those questions, it sounds infinitely relatable and exciting, because you know it's from truth, you know it's bigger than you, you know you've thought through the form, you know you thought for all these things. And I go through it like that. I always start with, I would write this document like that, and then send that with an email being like, hey, I loved your last show for these reasons. It sounds really daft, but like, I think one of the biggest things about, like, especially in film, I can only talk about film 13 there's the three I work in. It's like, if you've seen stuff and you know who's made it and you know why you loved it, that's the same thing. It gives you your taste, the reason why you work with those people. So you're like, look, I really loved whatever. Alma's Not Normal, Sophie Williams, fucking genius. You really gave voice to this like working class voice, and I feel like this sits in the same space, and I just want to share my story. Maybe we sit and work together. Everyone's got a fucking ego. Everyone in the world has an ego. They love to be told they're great. B, people want to work with people who have the same value systems all the time. So like, it shows you can do that. And C, it's like, it's the same as B really. I think people have the same value systems and want to have the same sort of like artistic ambitions, which is like, you know, if you've got like a production company who's like, or a theatre company's like, I want to make work that talks to working class audiences in like a really accessible way. Obviously, your Lonely Man play is going to be the first port of call for that, because that's what your whole thing is. So things just like being really aware of that. Like, it's such a stupid thing to say, but like, I make like a really conscious effort. If I ever absolutely love something, just always tell them, even if you never met them, just wrote them and say, I love this thing. No agenda, just want to tell you that thing. And then 2 years later, you're like, by the way, remember I told you love this thing? Got any money? I think it's like a really good habit to get into, because like, again, it's just like practical learning. It's like practical consuming of art. It's like, what would I steal? What would I do better? How connect this person? You know, I think it is mad the way it comes around. It's like, I think loads of stuff that I've done in my time has come because of like that conversation I had once 3 years ago, and you're like, oh, by the way, do you want to... Yeah, I think so. So that's like what I want to talk about for the session, really, is that. And I guess we've got like max, we can finish early, we've got half an hour left. So like, I want to lose some time at the end just to talk about anything you guys want to talk about that we can sort of like chat through as a group, maybe problem solve a bit. Floor's yours. What do you think? Nothing.
Has everyone got like projects on the go at the moment? I know you said, Sarah, that you're kind of in the middle of a rejection hole. Are people feeling like invigorated with the work they're doing, or is it? I feel like every time I look at the news at the moment, I just don't want to do anything and crawl into a small hole. I don't know if that's a similar feeling that a lot of people has.
Yeah, I think, and like I say, I've just keep getting rejected lately, but I know that happens, and you know, I'll get over it at some point. I just haven't yet. But it's.
I got rejected today.
Eh?
I got rejected today. It's one of those. Hey. Oh my God, no. It's happened before. It'll happen again.
Yeah. I think it's trying to, especially because it's with the, I don't know, with individual pieces, because I write short stories and scripts and creative non-fiction as well. And if I send a piece of writing off like a short, I don't know, I'm not as bothered. But when it's the script projects, because it's a project, there's more to it. I feel like I take it much more personally. And this particular project, I don't know what form it needs to take. I think it needs to be, it was a one-woman show, and I can't perform it. I've tried. I need someone who's an actor to do it. And you know, and it's kind of evolving, and I kind of don't know how to evolve it. I know I need to work with someone, but I don't know who to ask. And you know, like, I think I could work with another writer, or maybe find an actor who might want to do it and write it with them. And I'm just at that stage where I'm terrified. I don't know how to ask for help and who to ask. It's, you know, because the rejection that, you know, the possible people go, no, I don't want to work with you. And especially because I've never had anything big on, just a few small bits. It's like how getting that over that first hump of getting something decent on is just feeling a bit like insurmountable at the minute. But anyway, sorry, that was a big blurge of.
Yeah, I know that feeling. A friend of mine had this film commission about 2 years ago. He's a director, and it didn't happen. They didn't finish the development process with him, and he's now doing another one with the same company. And I was like, how did you do that? And he was like, well, I was just really honest about what I need in the next situation, and the next time I did it. And I was like, and I also really honest about what the place wants to work from, what I wanted to do, and what I need to like fill that gap. And I was like, it's really interesting. He was like, I want to make this thing about this. I know I can do this, but I can't do this. So I asked the person to do that thing I couldn't do for me. And then suddenly people took it a bit more seriously because you've been honest about what you need. And that sounds really silly, but like, it's not about the project itself necessarily. It's about like what the missing, what in that instance about what the missing thing is. I think it's about returning to like this stuff. It's like, why am I doing this? But you got all those big questions, and taking that to someone and being like, I want to do all this. I think I need a really good actor who can like also write a bit in dramaturg with me, who has a shared experience. I think that's like the approach you'd make for like what things, but finding the person, that's hard. I don't know how to do that. What does everyone else think?
So whereabouts are you based, Sarah?
I'm in Northumberland, so like I've got a connection with Live, so I just got a rejection for the elevator grant, which I was shortlisted. Shortlisting's again almost harder than full rejections, because you're like, I was so close, but they said I can have a chat, but because I'm in a rejection, I'm in a huff at the minute. I haven't replied.
Oh mate, honestly,
I'll
like
take him up on that, yeah.
for sure. 100%. I've done that before. I've said no to coffee like that before out of pure spite, and it's kicked me in the ass. Definitely, you should definitely go, because like I promise you, like I know Graham and my Live, I know that building's so busy that they wouldn't say that, they didn't mean it.
Yeah,
I know that in the bottom of my heart, because you know I know those people that shit at emails and shit at everything, shit at all that stuff. So like to ask that, I think they genuinely mean that. So that's the first book call I say was to do that. Take that meeting, say all this stuff, and they'll know loads of people.
I think it's one of the hardest things, isn't it? Just knowing. It's so different with. That's why I did the DYCP, because I just bloody love script and I really need to bring it into practice. But I live rurally. I don't. I'm COVID. I don't go indoor. You know, I feel kind of isolated from the world. But I'm trying to like navigate it without being in it. And being in the north can just feel like that sometimes, can't it? But this is great. Obviously, this is amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all really tricky to navigate.
I would say that's what live are there for.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
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 You know, like I or like Curious Monkey, all those companies, they exist to hook people up. It's not just about producing work; it's about fostering creativity and all that. So I would definitely just ask them and say like, and I know it sounds like basic, but like going back to those big questions, saying this is what I want to do, this is where I am, I need this thing to do this thing, and once I've got that, once we've done that, then I can put in a bid to produce it.
I've also found as well, like that sometimes going and reaching out to like more independent theatre companies can be quite helpful rather than going for like, you know, main house theatres. Sometimes it's like the network of other companies that are like, I don't know, Sarah, like obviously I'm in Newcastle as well. I'm totally up for a chat with you anytime. But like, you know, companies like Curious Monkey, like all the ones in Newcastle, I'm sure would be willing to like help like the share networks or try and like get you to meet some people, or you know, so kind of just think sometimes other organizations are helpful as well, because the main house theatres are so busy and do not reply to emails no matter how many times you send them. So
I would say live are brilliant, because I always say this whenever I apply for anything and inevitably get rejected. They're always really good at replying and letting you know, where some places aren't. They're like on my, because I do facilitation as well, I have like, this is awful, I have a bit of a shit list of people who don't treat people well, and then I have the list of people who do treat people well, and obviously live are on the list of people who do. And Bottleneck and people like that locally, there's loads of little small companies up here doing nice stuff as well. So yeah, it's just confidence. I say one thing but can't do it for my own work, but I think we're all a bit like that.
Oh yeah.
I was also gonna, oh go on, sorry.
No, I just said, oh yeah, sorry.
I was just gonna say, like before as well, when you were saying about the confidence thing, because I 100% relate like so hard. In terms of like that fear, like no one's gonna think my ideas like worthy, or like, you know, they're not gonna think I'm good, whatever. And like I remember a while ago I was looking for a producer to work with me on the show that I'm making at the minute, and I just reverted to Twitter because I was just so lost. I was just like, you know what? And actually, like, it was during lockdown, I was feeling proper lost. And if anything, like what that taught me was that people are kind, like people are willing when there's an opportunity on the table. Usually in the arts, like, I mean, we can all relate, I'm sure, like when there's an opportunity available, we're interested, or like we're at least like, oh, and if people are looking for opportunities, they'd be well willing to have a chat with you, I reckon. So like remember that you're also offering something good and worthwhile that people, you're an asset, and like that kind of thing to other people.
I like that. Yeah,
that's really brilliantly put. I think it is really easy, isn't it, to feel like you're kind of someone else has all the answers, and I think it's kind of like you have something, so like your ideas are, as we've been kind of talking about today, like good and brilliant and not shit, and you can kind of have confidence in them. Yeah, I've whacked my email.
They don't lose their jobs.
Yeah.
No question.
I've whacked my email in the chat there as well, so if you want to drop me a line, and I'll ask around here, see if anyone has any ideas on actors in the Northeast. I think because it's tricky, isn't it? So yeah.
What's someone else dealing with?
I'm kind of I just have lots of different projects that I start, and then I guess for me it's like trying to figure out which one is worth putting my my time and my energy into, because I just feel like I have lots of ideas. I'll start on a project and I'll have another idea and then I'll start off on that one, and kind of looking at ideas through a different lens after a certain amount of time. So being like, after a few months of working on something, I think actually that's really shit, maybe I'm going to try this new idea. So I guess I just wonder how if other people have that same struggle, and if so, like how people are able to kind of decide what's worth pursuing.
What's everyone think?
I have the same struggle. I don't know if I've got an answer, but my recent answer is that because I struggle with that, because I write in a few different forms, and I've got like 4 jobs, but which we all do, is I'm trying to, quite often I'm working towards deadlines for, I don't know, like competitions and things, but I'm doing a month on each thing at the minute, and that sounds weird, but the only way I can focus myself is to say, right, for November, I'm going to work on this thing. And I'm not going to work on anything else. And then if it goes well, I'll keep going. And if it doesn't, I can move on to something else and come back to it. But I'm trialing it. I don't know if it's going to work. But it's because I'm trying to get bigger things done. It's really easy to do because I do a lot of short stories. It's like, ooh, it's like a small hit. But to work on bigger things, you need to be like, this is all I'm going to work on for a while. You know, sometimes you might need a. But I quite often pick deadlines for things. And even if there's a competition, I know, Northern Writers Awards, even if you don't submit anything, if you say, oh, well, by the 17th of February, I need to have like 3 short stories, then at least you don't have to send it, but you've given yourself like a bit of a deadline. That can help a bit. But anyway, that's just what I do. But
deadlines, I think having like an accountability friend who quickly becomes an enemy as well. Someone who's just going to nag you. Like if you say, I'm going to send you a draft by this point, and get them to hold you to it, I guess, with some sort of forfeit. You owe me a coffee if you don't.
It's so interesting. Like my mates, my mates is a cool thing. It was like when you're back in school, you wouldn't do your maths homework and your English homework at the same time, would you? It's like doing one thing at a time. I think it's really useful. And then the other thing is like, I know it sounds daft, but like even if you get that voice in your head being like, "Oh, but the other idea was awesome," it's parking that. Because what I've come to realize is that voice isn't you saying you like that idea more, it's you saying, fuck me, the writing is hard. So it's like, sit down, I'm gonna finish this, and then I can start the next thing, and then have the thought about the thing after. That constant, it always happens. It's just like, it always happens. You're like doing this thing, you're like, oh, but I've got this idea about dragons. No dragons, lonely men first, thanks. You know, I think that's like a really good, and also like it's like going back to like the bit that I keep saying, like going back to that thing, being like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Reminding yourself, actually, this is about more than me as impact. So I'm gonna see this thing through first, and then move on to the next thing. I think feels useful to me. How's that feel? Sorry, Sean.
No, I was just going to add to that because, like, yeah, I love that because I really relate to it. But my brain works in a very similar way. And like someone, I can't remember who it was, but recently told me that they have like a script graveyard document is what they call it. And like it's basically just a document that whenever they get like little ideas popping into their head or like distracted with something, they go into that document, write it down, and then just go back to the big thing. Like just choose one thing to have and focus on, like people have said already. But then like if there are little other bits, like because they probably will be great, and be ready for another time. Like the graveyard document has like been my new best friend because I'm just like, oh, a little sentence that I'm not going to use in this, but I could use somewhere else.
Yeah, and that new idea thing's really. What I do is I try and mark out like a week for, or like whatever how much time I need to do a task on a project, and then like if I get a new idea, I'll be like, I'm going to put a week in the diary. The next week on the diary, I'll do that thing. Then obviously it comes, and then things get prioritized. Blah, blah, blah. What you end up getting is like what I end up having is about like 6 months of like knowing what I'm going to do creatively that week. It's a really useful thing to do, is being like, okay, now I feel like I've got momentum because I'm always doing something. I can always try and sell something in that process. It's actually quite a useful thing, I think, to be distracted, because it just means that you'll have ideas for later and you've got something to do later. It's like I've only had it a few times where I've got to like that week and there's nothing in them. I'm like, oh my God, what the fuck do I do now? But like having those like distracted ideas, even just a starting place, is useful, right? What do you think?
I think so. I would agree. I think, yeah, having that time blocked out in advance as well, because it's weird, isn't it, when you kind of get to the end of something and it just feels like, especially with like first drafts, I find like once you kind of like the victory is like really short-lived, it's like a great moment of like, oh, now I have to like actually go back and work on it. But knowing that you've got something lined up further down the line, you can put it away for a little bit, is really nice.
takes the pressure as well. I think like if you're doing something that goes bad, it's going badly, which it always does. You're like, it's all right because I've got this cool idea coming up when I finish this. That'll be the one. And then that cycle goes on forever, and then you're just making mediocrity forever. No. But you know what I mean? I think like it is actually generally quite a useful thing to have, because it takes the pressure off that thing being awesome as well, I think.
I've got the complete opposite at the minute of like, I feel like I've been spending too much time on one thing. Like it's been just taking me forever. So now I'm like self-doubt of like, why is it taking me this long? And like, that must mean it's shit if it's taken this long. Like that's the bad, horrible voice. And like, I'm still trying to persevere, but various things, you know, have come in the way, like a global pandemic. But yeah, it still feels like I've just been grafting away at it for like 4 years. And in theatre world, like I've noticed that in TV, that's sort of normal. Like, you can be working on something for like years and years and years before it gets commissioned or whatever. But yeah, with theatre, I'm always a bit like, I feel like I'm failing more if I'm like taking a long time in theatre, because it feels like we've got to be like churning out new things all the time, or like trying to put new scripts out, especially in theatre. That's what I found anyway.
Things just take as long as they take. I delivered a script today. It's taken me 4 years.
Yeah,
like things just take the length they take. Sometimes you're like, fucking yeah. Just another, you're like, well, I'm gonna put it in the drawer for a year because I can't think about it right now. Things just take the time, don't they? No pressure. Who's timing you?
Yeah, exactly. Myself. It's like when you fall out of love with it and you're like, oh shit.
But again, like out. I think I know it keeps like a broken record, but like going back to these questions of like, why have I done this? What's the point? Because like when you read it, if you spend that long on something, you read it, you'll feel nothing, just because purely you've read it so many times, because you've been in that world. You'll feel nothing, guarantee it. Shakespeare could read Hamlet and feel nothing, because he's like, yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, because you forget, because you don't have that impulse you did at the start. But if you know you've answered those big questions, you know it works, you know it's valid, you know all these things, you know the mechanics of it work. So what's the problem? Because I imagine, because you go, you know, next stage obviously is like when you've written it, going through it all and making sure it works as a piece of drama. So you know it all works. If you know the impetus is there, if you know the form and all that is you, what's the problem?
Yeah.
It's hard. I know it's a hard thing to think, but like it's just like, I think when I get to that place, it's about answering the logical questions for me. It's like answering these questions like it's so I can validate myself, knowing that doing all the work to make it means it works a piece of theatre. And then like, look, at this point, I've just got to share it.
Yeah, I definitely got that recently where I was like, oh, I finally just shared it in front of an audience, and then you learn so many new things about it, don't you, when you do that? So yeah. That's
never ending. You know, I've had plays finish production, you're like, oh shit, the ending's wank. For example, do you know what I mean? It's just the fucking nature of like spending it, like, you know, creating something and then getting really excited about it and then seeing it loads and then no longer having that feeling. And as you get older, it's harder to feel as well, I think. Yeah. Anyone else?
I think I'm kind of battling, probably like many other people, with this idea of unpaid labour and making sure that the labour I am doing is getting paid. So I don't have another job, so to speak. So I write full time, but because I write prose as well, I'm used to like a structure with that, whereby I have the passion project, a novel that I'm trying to get published, that's like, you know, it's it. And then I have other stuff that I get paid for, that's not necessarily like everything. It's gonna, you know, keep the lights on. That's the point of it. And I haven't got to that place yet with theatre writing. So I feel like theatre writing, I'm still very much in that stage where you put everything into it, you write a whole play, and then you spend however many months sending it to competitions or writing an Arts Council bid, trying to get the money just to kind of recoup the labour that you've spent. on that. And so yeah, I'm just in that stage where I'm trying to work out how do I get to this place where I can be working in theatre, working in script writing, rather than writing scripts and then recouping years of, you know, and it might not be possible, but I know that other people are doing it. So I know it is. There are people who are like not necessarily having their big play put on at big houses, but are, you know, writing for the Royal Exchange's oldies group or their youth theatre or that kind of thing, and are like making income that way. So yeah, I think that's kind of my big challenge at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about theatre is like it is just generally so badly paid. That's the main thing to say. It's like ridiculously badly paid compared to any other medium of writing in the world, except maybe journalism. But
or poetry.
Or poetry. Now poetry is the big reason. Sorry, poetry is the one. But like, it's really bad. Been like, but for and like, I don't think anyone. Well, like 1-2% are making a lot of money in theatre. Like minutious amount of money, people. But in terms of like being able to sort of like go and pitch on those jobs, I think it's honestly it's two things. One thing is like writing something that you think is like quintessentially you and be like, this is me, this is like my voice. Having that and then getting as many people as you can to see it, and then also go and see other stuff and making friends with those people and then sharing your work with them. It's all about, it's not nepotism, it's just networking. You know, if you want to work at like honestly, you want to work at like the Royal Exchange, older people's group, it's just a matter of like writing to them, praising them loads, knowing exactly what they're doing, sharing your work, saying why it's good, saying you want to do it, and just keep asking. Like it's a lot of that stuff happens just by making friends with people, you know.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if anybody else gets this, but I'm pretty introverted. Like that's definitely the scariest part of any kind of like writing process for me, is the business aspect of it, you know. So yeah, I think that's like, I don't know if anyone else feels that way.
Yeah, 100%.
You asked me to write an email and I will panic about it for like a week before I send it, and getting that kind of like business head on is like a bit of a challenge, but not impossible. But yeah, that's just how my brain reacts to it.
Oh, I get it completely. The email thing's a big deal. I'm pathetic with it. I'll write the email and I'll send it to myself. I'll ask myself, would I like to get this email? And then I'll go through it and I'll be like, I'll read it again. I'll do it the same way I write a play for ages. But it'll take me whole mornings to write emails, for sure. It's good craft though, writing a good email, I think.
I think as well, because I fully like hear as well with like the amount of time that like applications, particularly like Arts Council and those really lengthy ones take, that just feels like, you know, spent how many days just trying to do the application, and it's really hard. But I've been hearing about like smaller pots of money that you can apply for that have like short applications, things like, I think, because I've been coming up against something, trying to get a reading of a play done, but also not wanting to ask anyone to like ask any actors to come and do this for free if I'm asking them to give up a day. So trying to find, there's a pot that Superbia are doing for, well, specifically queer artists at the moment, that's like you can apply for up to £1,000 for whatever you need it for, basically, and it feels more it's not the kind of mammoth of an Arts Council fund. It's less money, but it's also a little bit more accessible, I think. So I'm trying to look into what there is available for writers that are more those kind of one-off things, because sometimes you're like, if I could just have a day to work on this, if I could get like the day's pay, it would be easier. But yeah, that's a useful point to know, so thank you. Yeah,
and like sometimes theatre does feel like that. Just feel like you are just staying alive, Rain. You know. And I think one thing I realise is like everyone I know writes in theatre works in telly or film or radio, or writes novels or all that stuff, because like it's not impossible, but it's very unlikely that you're going to make all your money for 40 years just off theatre. Very unlikely, but possible. You could write Curations and retire tomorrow. Yeah. That's the thing we're all open for. The thing I love about this job is like around any corner you could just retire tomorrow. He says wishfully. I would love to retire. I would absolutely love it. I'd love to do this for fun and not just for like money. That'd be great.
Was it Lee Hall that said you can't plan to get to Hollywood? It's sort of just like you can't like write something that's gonna, you can't plan it. It's just gonna, if you just got to make the work that you want to make, and then who knows, you might get to Hollywood.
Love that.
Whether that's what you want or not.
No, I love that. I love that. Yeah. Great. Billy, anything for you? Or should we wrap up, or what do you think?
If everyone else if there's nothing else anyone wants to share, I'll just
I was going to
tell
say
you about some.
Right, you go. I was going to say, Jed, anything you want to talk about with your writing, but if you want to wrap up, let's wrap up.
I think I feel kind of a similar way to a lot of people here. I think a lot of the same kind of frustrations are coming up, particularly at that sort of what you were saying, Sean, about like things taking a really long time. Like I've got a play on next year that I wrote the first draft of in 2019, and it's just felt like kind of every time it's like, and now, okay, and similarly, like as I was saying, like me and Luke were talking earlier about whether or not it will still be relevant, and worrying whether or not people are going to think it's relevant, and kind of having to sort of let go of that fear a little bit and just stay true to what I want it to be. It's a scary thing. It's a scary thing. Yeah. Oh, fantastic, someone. Amazing. Yeah, I do. And if you feel like happy to share your details with each other, then absolutely do. But if there's nothing else, I will wrap up if that's okay. It's happy, but yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Luke, for your time and for sharing your wisdom with us. I've definitely taken a lot away from this. Also, I want to remind you that the next of these masterclasses will be taking place on the 3rd of November. It's going to be with Ella Greenhill, and she's going to be talking about adapting novels, which is really exciting. You can find all of the details of that and the sign-up link on our website or on our social media. I'd also flag that the submissions window for Playbox, which is Box of Tricks' early career talent development scheme, so it's a year-long attachment that has opened recently. Again, all of the details on our website, but don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions. Thank you again for coming along.